The unexpected kindness of a poor street hawker shocked the entire crowd. But no one noticed that a billionaire was watching from afar, his eyes fixed on the one decision that would reveal the true measure of a man's heart. As frightened voices rose outside a busy pharmacy, a desperate mother clutched the prescription that could save her gravely ill child, but she was just a few notes short. People watched. Some pitied her, others walked away. Then a poor street hawker, exhausted after spending the entire day under the scorching sun, quietly stepped forward. He reached into his pocket, counted the last money he had earned, and froze for a moment. That money was meant to feed his hungry wife and 2 children waiting for him at home, but the tears of a stranger's child stood right in front of him. The entire crowd held its breath as the poor street hawker made a choice no one expected. Across the street, hidden behind the tinted windows of a luxury car, a billionaire watched every second in complete silence. But why didn't he step in himself? Who was this poor street hawker, and what painful past had taught him to give when he had almost nothing? Why was the desperate mother left with no one else to turn to? And when the billionaire finally revealed that he had witnessed everything from afar, would his presence become a blessing, or uncover a truth that would change every life in that crowd forever? Long before that unforgettable evening, Emeka Okafor's days always began in darkness. Before the city stirred, he slipped quietly from the thin mattress he shared with his wife, Adiz, and their 2 children inside a cramped one-room apartment whose peeling walls silently testified to years of hardship. Kneeling beside the bed, he whispered, "Lord, give me enough for today. Not riches, just enough." 7 years earlier, Emeka had worn a factory uniform instead of balancing a wooden tray on his head. When the textile factory shut its gates without warning, his steady income disappeared overnight. Months of searching for work ended with polite smiles and empty promises. It was Adiz who quietly removed her wedding necklace and placed it in his hands. "Sell it," she had said. "Our marriage isn't in the gold, it's in us." The money bought his first stock of biscuits, bottled water, and ground nuts. Since then, every sunrise had become another chance to keep his family afloat. That morning, Adiz handed him the last piece of bread in the house. "What about you and the children?" Emeka asked. She forced a smile. "We'll manage." He looked at Chindu and little Amara sleeping peacefully, unaware that their father measured every day against the fear of coming home empty-handed. As Emeka stepped into the waking city with his tray balanced high, he couldn't know that before sunset, one impossible choice would reveal a wealth no money could ever buy. The morning rush swallowed Emeka almost as soon as he reached the main road. Car horns blared impatiently, buses released clouds of black smoke, and hundreds of street traders competed for the attention of drivers trapped in traffic. Balancing his heavy tray with practiced ease, Emeka greeted every customer with the same warm smile. Cold water, fresh biscuits, ground nuts. Some smiled back, many ignored him. By noon, the scorching sun hung directly overhead. Sweat soaked through his faded shirt and his shoulders ached beneath the weight of the tray. Still, he refused to complain. Years earlier, his late father had often told him, "People may forget what you sold them, but they'll never forget how you treated them." Those words had become the quiet rule guiding every sale. Near one intersection, another hawker sighed, "Business is terrible today." Emeka nodded, "Tomorrow may be kinder." He believed those words even when they were difficult to prove. Across the city, a black luxury SUV moved steadily through traffic. Inside sat billionaire businessman Daniel Okoro, reviewing documents while his driver navigated the crowded streets. Unlike many executives, Daniel often insisted on driving through ordinary neighborhoods instead of avoiding them. He believed a city's true character lived far beyond its boardrooms. Quietly observing the people outside had become a habit born after losing his own father, a humble mechanic who had taught him never to judge a person's worth by their possessions. As the SUV rolled past the intersection, Daniel's eyes briefly rested on Emeka, who helped an elderly customer gather scattered oranges after another pedestrian accidentally knocked them onto the road. No cameras recorded the moment. No one applauded. Daniel simply watched before the traffic carried him away. Neither man realized their paths would cross again before the day ended, under circumstances neither wealth nor poverty could have predicted. By late afternoon, Emeka counted his earnings beneath the shade of a roadside tree. The worn notes in his hand were fewer than he had hoped, but enough to buy a small bag of rice, a loaf of bread, and fresh stock for tomorrow. He slipped the money carefully into his pocket and smiled to himself. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered. "Today was enough." He lifted his tray and began the familiar walk home. As he passed a neighborhood pharmacy, hurried footsteps and desperate cries broke through the evening noise. "Please," a young woman pleaded, clutching a prescription with trembling hands. "My daughter has had a high fever since last night. I have almost everything. I'm only short by a little. I'll bring the balance tomorrow." The pharmacist's face reflected genuine sympathy. "I believe you," he said gently, "but these medicines are supplied on credit. If I release them without full payment, I cannot replace them." In the woman's arms, 6-year-old Zainab lay weak and barely conscious, her small body burning with fever. Her shallow breathing instantly reminded Emeka of a frightening night 3 years earlier when little Amara had battled malaria. He could still remember packing outside a clinic, praying she would survive until morning. That memory had never truly left him. Several customers watched in silence. One man lowered his eyes and walked away. Another quietly muttered someone should help. No one moved. Across the street, Daniel Okoro's SUV slowed as traffic halted near the pharmacy. Through the tinted window, he noticed the growing crowd. He could not hear every word, but he saw the mother's tears, the exhausted pharmacist, and a poor street hawker who had suddenly stopped walking. Emeka slowly slipped his hand into his pocket and felt the day's earnings. Everything his family needed rested in his trembling hand. The pharmacy fell unusually quiet as Emeka stared at the folded notes in his hand. They represented more than money. They were his children's dinner, tomorrow's business capital, and his family's hope for another day. His fingers tightened around them. But each glance at the little girl struggling to breathe made the choice even harder. The mother wiped away her tears. "Please," she whispered to the pharmacist, "she doesn't have much time." Emeka closed his eyes for a brief moment. "Lord, help me do what is right." Without another word, he stepped forward and placed every note he had earned that day on the pharmacy counter. "Use this," he said quietly. The woman stared at him in disbelief. "No, I can't take your money." "You can," Emeka replied with a gentle smile. "Your daughter needs it more than my family does tonight." The pharmacist quickly counted the money. It was exactly enough. He turned immediately, collected the prescribed medicine, and handed it to the grateful mother. Around them the crowd remained speechless. An elderly man removed his cap. A young woman quietly wiped tears from her eyes. Someone whispered, "That man is a hawker, and he gave everything." Across the street, Daniel Okoro never looked away. His assistant reached for the door handle. "Sir, should we help him?" Daniel slowly shook his head. "Not yet." His voice was calm, yet filled with admiration. "I want to know whether that kindness came from desperation or from character." Unaware that anyone important had witnessed the moment, Emeka picked up his now-light tray and turned toward home. His pocket was empty, but his heart carried an unusual peace. Behind him, the crowd continued watching in silence, sensing they had witnessed something far greater than generosity. They had just seen a poor man give away the only thing he could not afford to lose. The walk home felt longer than usual. Every familiar street reminded Emeka of what he no longer carried. He had no bag of rice, no loaf of bread, and no money to restock his tray the next morning. Only the empty wooden tray rested on his shoulder as the evening sky slowly surrendered to darkness. When he stepped inside, Adiz looked toward his hands before meeting his eyes. She immediately understood something was wrong. "Emeka," she asked gently, "what happened?" He lowered the tray onto the floor and sat quietly for a moment. "I met a mother outside a pharmacy," he began. "Her little girl was very sick, she couldn't afford the medicine." Adiz listened without interrupting. "I gave them everything." Silence filled the small room. The children looked from one parent to the other, sensing the weight of the conversation without fully understanding it. Finally, Adiz reached for his hand. "Did the child get the medicine?" "Yes." A faint smile appeared on her face, followed by tears she made no effort to hide. "Then you brought home something greater than food." Her words carried him back to the day she had sold her wedding necklace. Neither of them had ever measured love by possessions. They had always believed that character was the one treasure hardship could never steal. Chindu quietly walked to the cupboard and returned with the small container holding the last handful of rice. "We can share this," he said. Little Emara nodded. "I'll eat less." Emeka's eyes filled with tears. He realized kindness had taken root in his children long before this day. As they gathered around their simple meal, none of them complained. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that in one tiny room a family had chosen compassion over comfort. Far across town, Daniel Akoro instructed his assistant to find the poor street hawker whose sacrifice had refused to leave his thoughts. 3 days later, the medicine began doing what prayers alone could not. Zainab's fever finally broke. Her breathing steadied, her appetite slowly returned, and the doctors smiled for the first time since her mother had rushed her into the clinic. Every improvement reminded Amina that her daughter was alive because a stranger had chosen compassion over his own comfort. "I don't even know his name," she whispered, holding Zainab's hand. "You'll find him," the nurse replied. "People like that are never truly lost." Meanwhile, Emeka returned to the streets with a much smaller tray. Unable to afford fresh stock, he had borrowed a few items from another hawker, promising to repay him after the weekend. His earnings were thinner than before, but he greeted every customer with the same warmth. Few could guess the sacrifice he had made days earlier. To Emeka, kindness was never something to announce. Across the city, Daniel Akoro quietly kept his own promise. "Find the hawker," he instructed his assistant. "Don't disturb him, I want to know who he is when no one is watching." The report that arrived surprised him. Emeka had no criminal record, no hidden debts from gambling, and no history of seeking public sympathy. Neighbors described him with the same words again and again: honest, dependable, and generous, even when he had almost nothing. Those descriptions stirred an old memory. Daniel recalled his father refusing extra payment from a struggling customer, saying, "Character is what a man keeps after money is gone." As a boy, Daniel had never forgotten those words. Now he wondered if he had just witnessed someone living them. That afternoon, Amina returned to the pharmacy with Zainab, hoping someone could identify the poor street hawker whose unexpected kindness had changed their lives. A week after Zainab left the clinic, Amina returned to the pharmacy once again. This time, the pharmacist smiled as Emeka approached the counter to buy a small packet of biscuits to restock his tray. "That's him," the pharmacist said softly. Before Emeka could speak, Amina hurried toward him with Zainab beside her. The little girl, now full of life, wrapped her tiny arms around his waist. "Mommy said you're the man who helped me," she said with a bright smile. "Thank you." Emeka stood speechless. "You don't owe me thanks," he replied gently. "I'm just happy you're well." "But you gave us everything," Amina said, her voice trembling. "The pharmacist told me what you sacrificed. I searched everywhere because I couldn't let your kindness go unanswered." The pharmacist nodded. "He walked away with nothing that evening. Every naira he earned was for your daughter's medicine." People nearby stopped to listen. A customer lowered the shopping bag in his hand. A bus conductor stepped closer. Within moments, a small crowd had gathered outside the pharmacy. One elderly woman whispered, "He chose a stranger's child over his own dinner." Another man shook his head in disbelief. How many of us watched and did nothing? Emeka felt uncomfortable as every eye turned toward him. "Please," he said quietly, "don't praise me. Anyone could have done the same." The crowd exchanged silent glances. Deep down, many knew that wasn't true. Across the street, Daniel Akoro's SUV slowed once more. Watching from behind the tinted window, he saw gratitude replace desperation and humility replace pride. The growing crowd wasn't celebrating wealth or power, they were honoring character. Daniel looked at his assistant and spoke with quiet certainty. "It's time." For the first time since that unforgettable evening, he reached for the door handle. The crowd instinctively parted as the door of the black luxury SUV opened. Conversations faded into whispers. Daniel Akoro stepped onto the pavement without bodyguards surrounding him or cameras following behind. His tailored suit contrasted sharply with Emeka's faded clothes, yet his eyes carried neither pride nor pity. He walked directly toward the street hawker and extended his hand. "My name is Daniel Akoro." Emeka hesitated before shaking it. "I'm Emeka." "I know," Daniel replied with a gentle smile. The crowd fell silent. "I was here the evening you helped this little girl," Daniel continued, glancing at Zainab. "I watched everything from across the street." Emeka looked surprised. "You saw it?" "I did." A brief silence followed before Emeka asked the question that had quietly lingered in many minds. "Then why didn't you help?" Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment. "My father was a mechanic," he said. He taught me that money can solve problems, but character reveals who a person truly is. Had I stepped in first, I would never have known the kind of man you are." His words carried the weight of an old memory. As a young boy, Daniel had once watched his father repair a widow's car without charging her. When he asked why, his father simply answered, "Son, never let wealth replace your humanity." That lesson had shaped every success Daniel built. "You gave without knowing anyone was watching," Daniel said. "You expected nothing in return. That kind of integrity is rare." Emeka smiled modestly. "I only did what my conscience wouldn't let me ignore." Daniel nodded. The answer confirmed everything he had quietly discovered during the past week. Turning to the crowd, he said, "Today you've witnessed something money cannot buy. Now it's my turn to honor it, not with charity but with opportunity." The crowd waited, wondering what those words truly meant. Daniel turned back to Emeka, his expression calm but resolute. "I didn't come here to hand you an envelope and disappear," he said. "A gift can be spent, an opportunity can change generations." The crowd leaned in. "I asked people about you," Daniel continued. "Every person told me the same story. They spoke about your honesty, your hard work, and your willingness to help others long before anyone knew your name." Emeka lowered his head, embarrassed by the attention. "I've arranged something," Daniel said, "if you're willing to accept it." "What is it?" Emeka asked. "A fully stocked neighborhood grocery shop. The building has already been secured. Your first inventory is paid for, and experienced business mentors will help you manage it. Your children will also receive scholarships through secondary school." The crowd erupted into applause. Emeka stood frozen. This is too much." Daniel smiled. "No, it's an investment in someone who has already proven his greatest qualification, his character." For a moment, Emeka thought of the factory gates closing years earlier, of Adiz placing her wedding necklace into his hands, of nights when the family shared one meal without complaint. Every hardship had quietly prepared him for this moment, though none of them had promised it would ever come. Tears filled his eyes. "I don't know how to repay you." "You already have," Daniel replied. "You reminded me that success means very little if it cannot recognize goodness." The crowd applauded again, but Daniel raised a hand. "Remember this," he said. "What changed Emeka's life wasn't the reward, it was the decision he made when he believed no one was watching." Those words settled over the gathering, leaving everyone with the same question. If they had stood where Emeka stood that evening, would they have made the same choice? Several months later, the wooden tray that had rested on Emeka's shoulders for years hung proudly on the wall of his small grocery shop. Customers came not only because the shelves were well stocked, but because they trusted the man behind the counter. Every morning, Adiz arranged fresh goods while Chindu and Amara hurried off to school, their new uniforms carrying dreams that once seemed impossible. One afternoon, Amina and a healthy, smiling Zainab walked into the shop carrying flowers. "We'll never forget what you did for us," Amina said. Emeka smiled warmly. "Then promise me something." "Anything. When you see someone in need, help them if you can. That's all the thanks I'll ever need." She nodded, understanding that kindness only changed the world when it continued from one person to another. Daniel Okoro visited quietly from time to time, never seeking recognition. Watching Emeka serve every customer with the same humility he had shown as a street hawker reminded him that success had never changed the man, it had simply given his character a larger stage. Before leaving one evening, Daniel glanced at the old wooden tray. "You kept it." Emeka smiled. "It reminds me that poverty never defined me, the choices I made did." Outside, the street bustled as it always had. Hawkers still chased traffic, mothers still carried heavy burdens, and strangers still passed one another without knowing the battles hidden behind ordinary faces. Yet one story had quietly changed an entire community. People no longer remembered only the billionaire who created an opportunity. They remembered the unexpected kindness of a poor street hawker that shocked the entire crowd, unaware that a billionaire was watching from afar. Because in the end, the greatest acts of kindness are never measured by how much we have, but by what we're willing to give when no one expects anything from us.